Don't miss out on your Steam Deck's hidden features. How's it going, everyone? Welcome to Deck Ready. In today's video, I am going to share with you the master list of tips and tricks I've built out over the past year of using this device, or like the past year and a couple months. I'm just going to jump into it with the first tip. So sometimes when you're using the built-in frame limiter on the Steam Deck, when you go down to like 30 FPS, it's even more noticeable. You'll notice input lag. And the best way I've figured out to combat this is that in some games, I just use VSync instead of the built-in frame limiter. Now, obviously, this works better with games that run at 60 FPS, but sometimes games will have a half refresh rate VSync, and in that case, you can get it to run at 30 FPS and be a lot smoother and have less input lag than you'd see with the Steam Deck's built-in limiter. This video is sponsored by Opera GX. Opera GX is pretty much a browser built from the ground up for gamers. One of the cooler things about Opera GX is that it offers you endless customization to the point where it can be kind of overwhelming. They have mods built into the browser that let you flip it 180 degrees. You can change the sound of your keyboard that it makes when you're typing. But even if you want to just do something simple like change the background, they've got you covered there too. You can also turn music on and off with the click of a button. When you use a built-in system browser like Microsoft Edge or Safari, it can actually impact the performance of your games by eating up your CPU and RAM. Opera GX stops that from being an issue by letting you limit how much of your RAM and CPU it's allowed to take up. So your games will be running fine even if you have a bunch of tabs open. My favorite feature about Opera GX though is that it has a cool sidebar that lets you log into all your favorite social media apps like Discord, TikTok, Messenger. It's all right there and easy to access, so you don't have to have a bunch of tabs open with all your social media. If you're watching this channel, chances are you're a gamer, so there's really nothing to lose. You should probably go try Opera GX today with my link down in the description, or you can use the QR code on screen. Huge shout out to Opera GX for sponsoring this video. Next up, you should try running games at 40 FPS. So there's a slider they introduced on the Steam Deck in the 3 dots menu, I don't know what to call it, the options menu, where it goes from 60 all the way down to 40. When you do that, the limiter will actually change. So instead of being 30 and 60, it'll be 20 and 40. And this is awesome for games that definitely can't run at 60 FPS like Hi-Fi Rush, but have no trouble running at a perfect 40 FPS. And the reason you want to use 40, it's the perfect halfway point between 30 and 60. I don't really understand why that's good. I just know that it looks really good compared to 30 FPS in games that can take advantage of it. Next up, you can get a plugin manager for the Steam Deck called Decky Loader. I'm counting that as a tip in itself. And then once you have that installed, which is pretty easy, you can get something called Vibrant Deck, which makes your screen look a lot better. Basically what it does is in that 3 dots menu, it adds a slider that lets you increase or decrease the saturation of your screen. It works in some games better than others. I really liked it in Tunic and Dead Cells, but I wouldn't use it in something like The Evil Within because that game has a defined art style that looks kind of good in a more sepia washed out tone. And once you have Decky Loader installed, there's another plugin I really like that adds the Proton DB rating of a game to its actual art in the Steam listing in your library, which is pretty cool, so you can see how you know the game is going to react to being run through Proton instead of natively in Linux, which is like 99% of the games on the Steam Deck. And the next tip I have is about Proton DB itself. So this is like a website where every game pretty much on Steam is in its database, and people can go on there and report how a game runs, if they have to use different versions of Proton, or if they have any tips or tricks or tweaks for a specific game that might not work out of the box but be simple to get working. Great example is Resident Evil 5. They fixed this, but before the Games for Windows Live aspect of that game was causing problems on the Steam Deck, there was a super easy fix you could do, and I only found out about that through Proton DB. And Resident Evil 6 had an issue where you couldn't play cutscenes. That was also easy to fix just by looking at Proton DB. So if you're ever having issues with a game, instead of just uninstalling it and not playing it, make sure you check that website because usually people are pretty good about sharing tips. Sticking with Decky Loader, there's also a plugin that allows you to connect how long to beat to your Steam library, so any game that has a listing on how long to beat will then update on your Steam Deck with the amount of time it takes to get through the story, with the amount of time it takes to get through the story with some extras, and how long it'll take for my friend Gerard the Completionist to get through a game at 100%. And the final Decky plugin that I like is called CSS Loader. This one's cool because it lets you change the theme of your Steam Deck, and just like back in the day with the PSP, people are actually pretty active in making some cool themes that don't mess with anything on your Steam Deck, but make it look a little bit cooler and help you make it yours. You can't even do that on a PS5 without jailbreaking it, so it's pretty dang cool to see on a handheld. Another tip I have is to pay attention to your GPU clock speed. Some games don't need the GPU to be totally maxed out, so you can actually save battery life by limiting it. And some games like Jedi Fallen Order work 1000% better if you just limit the GPU to 1100 megahertz. If it's swinging all over the place for how much power it's drawing, that can actually cause stuttering in that game. And I learned from my friends over at Steam Deck HQ that if you just limit it to 1100 megahertz, it keeps the game running as smooth as possible. It still stutters because the game has loading stutter, but you don't get stutters from just running around if you're limiting the megahertz of the GPU. So if you ever see someone tell you to limit the megahertz in a YouTube video or on Proton DB, all you have to do is open the three dots menu and scroll all the way down on the performance tab. All right, if you're someone who's used to consoles, being able to change the settings of games is kind of like a big wall to get over on the Steam Deck, I've noticed. So I would recommend looking at Steam Deck HQ for pretty much any game you want to play on your deck, because it's not going to be like Proton DB where it has a listing for every game. These are a bunch of people who manually test games and find the best settings. And for me personally, they have like 100% track record on finding the best settings. Jedi Fallen Order, great example. I just talked about how limiting the megahertz of your GPU actually makes that game run better. I would have never known that without Steam Deck HQ. And they have settings across the board for a ton of games. And they also rate games out of 5 stars on how well they run on the Steam Deck. So if you're playing a game and you want to find some great settings for it, I cannot recommend that site enough. If you're a Splatoon fan like me, you're probably used to gyro aiming on the Switch, and thankfully the Steam Deck has it built in as well. You should try it out if you've never tried it before, because for games like Resident Evil 5, Doom Eternal, which is one of the best optimized games on the Steam Deck, it can help with using those little joysticks. As good as the joysticks are on the Steam Deck, having them get you to like 90% of where you want to be aiming, and then using the gyro to just get that extra little 10% makes you so much more accurate in shooting games. So if you've never tried out gyro, I highly suggest it. The next tip I have is that if a game just won't run on your Steam Deck, try streaming. There are multiple different streaming services at this point, whether it's GeForce Now, xCloud streaming. There's even an app that lets you remote play your PS5 on the Steam Deck. If a game is having trouble running and you already own it on one of these other platforms, you may as well try streaming it. I've streamed Destiny 2 before and it works pretty well. There's other games that people like streaming, like Forza Horizon 5. I'm definitely more of a person who likes playing games natively on the device, but if you really need to stream in a pinch, you can totally do that on the Steam Deck. And some people aren't like me and they like streaming more than playing games natively. Different strokes for different folks. Another tip is that you should definitely go into desktop mode at least once and try it out, because you'll see that Linux actually isn't that much more difficult to use than Windows. It's actually pretty dang close, apples to apples. And once you're in desktop mode, you should definitely try the Discover Store, because there's a bunch of apps in there that you can just download to your Steam Deck and use like you would on any other computer. They have Spotify, they have Discord, and there's another great app called Proton Up that'll allow you to install Proton GE. Basically, it's a community supported expanded version of Proton that runs certain games better on the Steam Deck, and you'll notice sometimes on Proton DB or even on Steam Deck HQ that they say to use a specific version of Proton GE. It's super easy to install with Proton Up. Next up, there are a ton of shortcuts on the Steam Deck, and you don't have to worry about memorizing them all, because if you hold the Steam button on your deck, it'll pull up a handy overlay screen that shows you literally every combination you can use. My two favorite combinations are Steam button and X. That'll bring up the keyboard in any app, and then the Steam button plus B will force quit a game. So if it's ever hanging or it's not responsive, just hold Steam button and B and the game will force quit. And once you have that keyboard up, you'll probably notice that it's not necessarily the best working keyboard in the game. Sometimes if you use the D-pad and A, it won't actually register your typing, which sucks. But what I've had 100% success rate with and gotten pretty good at is using both touchpads to type. At first, I didn't really like it, but now I'm a pro at it. You basically cover one half of the keyboard with each touchpad, and you just fly across it so much faster once you figure it out. If you're getting sick of the boot up movie on your Steam Deck, you'll be happy to know you can change it whenever you want. Now, there are officially supported ones by Valve in the Point Store. There are also a bunch of user created ones online you can get, and the best way to find the coolest ones is to just scan the Steam Deck subreddit once in a while. Also, while you're in the Points shop, make sure you grab all of the extra keyboards. The Steam Deck itself comes with a few different ones you can use, but Valve has made some extra ones you can download from there. there, and I hope they make more in the future because I like that feature of the Steam Deck. Just because it's called the Steam Deck doesn't mean you only have to use Steam. You can install the Epic Game Store, you can install GOG, there's an app called Heroic Launcher that allows you to install Epic and GOG, and it'll add those games to Steam for you automatically, which is great. And you can even use an app called Lutris to install Battle.net and play games like Diablo 2 Resurrected, which is great. It comes in really handy for people who have a huge library of free games on the Epic Game Store, or if games are exclusive to the Epic Game Store like Evil Dead or Dead Island 2. Now, no matter which model of the Steam Deck you got, you're going to notice that the storage is filling up pretty fast, and I would recommend upgrading your SSD. The most popular video on this channel is a tutorial on upgrading your SSD, so I would recommend checking that out if you're going to do it. But the best part is, since I made that video over a year ago, the pricing on SSDs has fallen a ton because more brands are making 2230 drives, mainly because people want them for their Steam Deck. I was able to put a 1TB drive in my deck, and it's awesome. And the next tip is you should also pick up a 1TB micro SD card because the prices on those have also fallen quite a lot since they were introduced a few years ago. Another tip I have is that if you're planning to upgrade your Steam Deck's SSD, take out the micro SD card before you take the back off of your device because it can actually crack your micro SD card in half. And this is also another super important tip. Once you have the back of your Steam Deck off, make sure the first thing you do is unplug the battery from the motherboard because you can actually fry your Steam Deck messing around with the SSD if there's still power in the device. This one might be controversial, but I kind of doubt it. You should probably just turn off rumble and haptics with your Steam Deck in the settings right out of the box because A, it eats into battery, and B, you're probably not even going to notice rumble in any games. Even with it maxed out, I barely notice it on my Steam Deck, and I ultimately just turned it off and I haven't gone back. Oh, while you're in the settings menu, I would just recommend turning off adaptive brightness on your screen because it is way too aggressive and it flies all over the place and just gets super irritating. And it shouldn't eat into battery life if you remember that you can hold the 3 dots button on the right side of the Steam Deck and move the left stick up or down to increase or decrease the brightness of your screen respectively. Speaking of the terrible battery life on the Steam Deck, one of the first accessories I would buy personally is a battery bank. I have one linked in the description that I use from Anchor. It'll charge the thing twice and it comes in super handy. And while you're at it, I would buy an extra charger for the Steam Deck, like an extra power brick that lets you unplug a cable and then get a way longer cable because the one that comes with the Steam Deck, you can't unplug it and it's also pretty short. I got a 2-pack on Amazon that are like 10 feet long and they're braided. They work over a year later just fine. There's also a power brick you can get pretty cheap as well. I got a 2-pack of braided cables that I think are like 10 feet long, and I also got a power brick from Anchor that has 2 USB-C ports so I can charge my phone and my Steam Deck at the same time. It's awesome. Another thing you shouldn't forget about is FSR. It's AMD's AI upscaler, and the Steam Deck actually has it built in, but I'm pretty sure it's an older version. That works really well for older games like KOTOR that run natively at a lower resolution. It actually makes the game look incredible if you use the built-in FSR on the Steam Deck, but newer games will have a newer version of FSR, and FSR has gotten way better in the year that the Steam Deck has come out. So I would almost always default to a game's settings menu FSR versus the built-in Steam Deck one, but again, for some games, the built-in one works just fine. Another accessory you should buy right away for the Steam Deck is a dock, and there are plenty of them out there. I think I've looked at literally every single one here on the channel. My favorite one is the official one from Valve. It's definitely the priciest at around 90 bucks, but it does come with an extra charger, which is pretty cool. And I'm just being real, I like the official Steam Deck logo on the dock, and I like that it's plastic, light, fits in my bag, and the Steam Deck fits perfectly in it. It also has an L-shaped USB-C cord that's like cut perfectly to fit onto the top of the Steam Deck, and it just makes things look and feel a little more official. If you're gonna go with a cheaper one though, my favorite brand is JSOX. Another tip I have for you is that if a game isn't working with the Steam Deck's controller out of the box, or you don't feel like the default version of controls it picks are working well for you, try community layouts. I've actually used these for a lot of games lately, like Star Wars Empire at War. The default controls work okay, but there's a community layout that works 1,000 times better. And the best way to figure out which one to use I've seen is to just look at the little thumbs ups underneath the community layouts, and the one that has the most thumbs ups is usually the best. And the best part is they even have community layouts for games from other launchers like Diablo 3. And sticking with controls, if you're someone who's more platform agnostic and you have a ton of hours on your Nintendo Switch and you're getting kind of confused by A and B on the Steam Deck being flipped, you can just go into the settings and go to controller, and there's a little toggle that lets you flip A and B, which is cool. You could also actually flip it for older PlayStation games that use circle instead of cross as the main button. If you want to get a quick 10 10% boost out of a ton of games on your Steam Deck, check out Cryo Utilities. It's super easy to install. Look, like, I'm not a technical person in any way. Even I was able to figure it out. Go to his YouTube channel, CryoBite33. There's a full tutorial and it'll even show you what games benefit the most from using his tool. And the final tip I have for you is to go to emudeck.com and install it right away. It'll download and install a ton of emulators for you, but it'll also configure the graphics and controls, which is like so awesome as someone who used to have to do that themselves as a kid and absolutely hated it. Again, I'm not the most technically minded person out there. And that is my mega list of Steam Deck tips. If you'd like to see another video like this, let me know in the comments below. And as always, my name is Jimmy Champagne, and I'll see you in the next one. Shape on.